All right, everyone, welcome back to Scripting and Automation for the IT Professional. We're going to be talking about Chapter 9 today. So far in this course, we spent a lot of time in different languages like C++, Python, and even Bash. Now we're going to pivot. We're going to tackle something else that is normally found in Windows. For this next section, we'll be diving into PowerShell. Now, PowerShell is the modern scripting engine for the Windows platform, and we'll learn all about it today. So, just as in Bash is our go-to command line for Linux and Mac OS, PowerShell is the equivalent in the Windows ecosystem. If you're managing the Windows server or even a desktop and want to automate some tasks, know that, well, you're probably going to be using PowerShell. PowerShell is normally found in the corporate environment and is made for Microsoft products. So what exactly is PowerShell? Well, it's really two things in one. First, it's the interactive command line shell, just like Bash, where we can type commands and get immediate results. Secondly, more importantly to this class, it is a very powerful scripting language. Now we can use this scripting language to write complex scripts and automate administrative tasks. Now here's the first big change in why PowerShell is so powerful for Windows. PowerShell is built directly on top of Microsoft's .NET framework. You don't need to be a .NET developer to use PowerShell, but this is where it gets its secret power. Because it's built on .NET, it has direct access to the native library of the Windows ecosystem. From managing files to configuring network settings and interacting with the Windows registry, it does everything. This is why it's such a better and much deeper version of it than a traditional shell, because its level of integration. Okay, one of the big differences we need to learn, if you're going to remember one thing from today, make it this slide. This is the single biggest difference between Bash and PowerShell, and what makes PowerShell so unique. In Bash, when you pipe commands together, you're just sending streams of plain text. If you run ls-l, for example, and then pipe it to another command, that next command just gets a wall of text. It then has to use another tool like grep or awk to parse that text and find specific pieces of information it needs. PowerShell doesn't do that. When you pipe commands in PowerShell, you're passing structured .NET objects from one command to the next. Think of this object like a container. This container has a lot of data in it, but every bit of data is labeled. This is what makes it such a big game changer. So let's take that analogy to the next stage. A Bash pipe is like writing a sentence in a text message. If we wrote that message on a piece of paper and then sent it down a tube, the person on the other end will get the message, but then they have to read the entire message, figure out what's important, and then decide what to do next. A PowerShell pipe, on the other hand, is like putting a detailed structured form inside the package and then sending it down. When the next station gets the package, it doesn't have to read the entire sentence. It just looks directly at the field named maybe CPU usage or file size to get the exact structured data it needs. So it doesn't have to parse the entire bit of information. This makes our scripts much cleaner and less prone to breakage if the text output changes slightly. In Bash, we have commands like ls, cp, and grep, but in PowerShell, the primary commands are called commandlets, and you'll see it cmdlets. These are designed to be a single, small command that do one thing, and they do it very well. Kind of like Linux, except for remember we're living on the .NET framework. One of the best things when we're dealing with PowerShell is going to be its consistency. All native commandlets follow a strict verb-noun naming convention. The verb describes the action, like get, set, new, or even remove. The noun then describes the act, what you're doing, like process, service, or item. So if you want to get a list of processes, what do you think the command would be? Well, on this example, we would want to get something. So get dash and then process. If we wanted to stop a service, we would say stop dash service. This makes commands incredibly predictable and easy to discover. This is definitely helpful when we're trying to learn this new language. So just like in Bash, we can use the pipe symbol to send and connect different commandlets. But as we just discussed, we're not just sending text. The PowerShell pipeline sends those complete objects from one commandlet to another. This allows us to chain commands together in a very powerful way without ever needing to parse text. You will not be able to memorize every command, and you don't have to. The most important skill is to learn how to discover the commands themselves. And you need to use, well, the help command to find the commands themselves. And you can do this all right inside of PowerShell terminal itself. Your best friend to finding commands is the get-command commandlet. Think of it like a search engine for commandlet. If you want to work with services, for example, but don't know the exact command, you can type get command -noun service, and it will it would show you every service out there, like get service, start service, stop service. It will show you all the services. Okay. Now, once you have the commandlet that you want to run, you might want to know how to run it. And what we can use is we can get the get help. So how do we find, like the man page for a commandlet? Well, this is going to be get help. So we'll type get help followed by the commandlet name. Like in our example here, get-help space get-process. Now this is going to give us a whole bunch of information of what we need to do to run this command and any types of parameters it's going to accept. Now, update help is our next command. This is super important and a common stumbling block for beginners. By default, Windows doesn't ship with all of the help files installed. So it's very useful the first time you use PowerShell to run it as an administrator and run the command update-help. This will go out to the internet and download the latest help documentation for all of your installed commandlets. If you skip this step, get help won't give you much useful information. So if you want to use the get help command, just be aware that you probably need to update help before you run it. Now it's going to take us several minutes to actually do that update, so make sure that you do it when you do have time and not in the middle of an emergency. All right, my favorite way of using get help is with the -examples switch. This is often the fastest way to learn any command out there, and you can run something like this: get help space copy item space -examples. Now what's cool about this is it will give us some practical real world examples, and then we can take those examples and adapt them for our use. Now the -online parameter is also great, as it will provide it will open up a full web page in a web browser, so we can read more about the command as well. Okay, it will take you to the online version. Think of that like info, but except for a fully online version. So we talked about objects, but how do you know what's inside of an object? Yeah, so my slide deck got a little bit off, but it's okay. So this slide deck here, this one's going to be working with commandlets. So it's important to be able to distinguish commandlets from other commands. So remember that you're still going to have access to all the other tools within Windows, such as ping or ifconfig or to interact. So any of those commands that we were able to use in command line will still be able to run in PowerShell. Now, anytime it's going to have that verb noun aspect, you're probably going to be dealing with a commandlet. Now, remember, commandlets are going to come from that external library, and so there's going to be a lot of commandlets that are going to be available to us. Now, not every commandlet's going to be installed on your PC, so you may have to bring in the commandlet by installing it. But what's really cool about this is going to also allow us to expand our libraries depending on what we have on our system. So if we have a new piece of software we want to interact with a commandlet, we can install that library then. All right, let's move on to the next slide and get back on track here. So we've talked a lot about the objects themselves, okay? But we don't really know what's inside of an object. So how do we know what property it has? Well, we can use this command called getMember. You can take any command and pipe it to getMember. Now, what this will do is it will act kind of like an X-ray machine. What it's going to do is it's going to look inside of all the properties of that object itself and all the actions that are available to us. For instance, if we did get process and we pipe it to getMember, this will show us all of the process object and give us all the properties such as name, ID, CPU utilization, and then we can also do things like sorting, filtering, or reporting on those objects. So if you don't know how to handle what the output of a command is, you can always pipe it into getMember, and it's a great way to understand what is inside that object so I know what I can do with it. Now, the equivalent of grep. Okay, let's talk about this. The equivalent of grep when it comes to PowerShell is going to be the where object commandlet. This is going to be our primary tool for filtering, and you can pipe a collection of objects and even provide it conditions. Okay, so it will only let the objects that match the conditions pass through. For instance, if I want to look at all the services on a computer, I can do the get-service, and then I can pipe it into where object, and maybe I only want to find the ones that are running. So each object is going to be in that $_ and then I'm going to look at the variable called .status of each object. And I want to make sure that I only look at the services that are running. If, for instance, I wanted to change this to say stops, all I would change is the word running to stopped. Okay? Now this is going to give us all of the objects that we need to continue on with our process. Now there are two other essential pipeline objects that we can use. One of them is going to be called sort object and select object. Sort object does exactly what it sounds like. It sorts the objects based on the property that you specify. Select object, on the other hand, is definitely one of the more versatile objects that you can do. We can just pick a few properties. For instance, if you want the name and the ID of a process, you can tell it to select the first or the last 5 objects in a similar list, like head or tail. Okay. Now, let's look at some practical examples. Just like Bash, PowerShell has a full suite of commandlets for files and directories. Thanks to the verb-noun convention, they're pretty easy and very consistent to learn. To list files, one of the easiest ways to do that is going to be the get child item. It's kind of like an ls or dir, okay? But to make things easier for people coming from other shells, PowerShell also has built-in aliases. So you can also still use ls, dir, gci, just like if you were in other operating systems. To change directories, you can use set location, but you could still use sl or cd depending on what operating system you're familiar with. Now for files, you can do the new item. This is like touch. It's your go-to for creating new files or directories. To write content to a file, you have 2 main options. You can say set content. set content will override everything in the file. So it's like using a single redirect like in bash, okay? Now if you want to append to that file, you're going to want to run the add content. This is like using the double redirect in bash. So be very careful when you say set versus add. If you're overwriting, just know that you probably use set versus add if you wanted to append. Now, if you want to, you can also use copy, move, and rename. These are still going to follow the same patterns. Copy item, move item, rename item. But remember, you can still use all of the aliases, CP, copy, move, REN, anything that you want to for short. All right, commandlets for deleting. I want to make sure that we spend an extra second on this one. So the commandlet is remove item, and it does have aliases like RM or DEL, but I want everyone to pay some close attention here. This command permanently deletes files. There are no there's no recycle bin. Just like if we did rm-r in Linux, there is not a recycle bin. It's just gone. So before you ever press enter on remove item, I recommend that you say the -what-if command. If you put the -what-if parameter first, it will tell you exactly what the command would do. And you can also -confirm, so that way it won't remove anything until you say, yes, I want to delete that. But if you want a dry run for the command, the -what-if command is also, it's just a great way of running it before you actually do the remove item. Now, if you're scripting this, of course, you won't know exactly how to you can't run the what-if command, but when you're writing your scripts, you can do the what-if command to see what the command would do and make sure that it's doing what you expect it to do. All right, so let's wrap up this introduction. So we've seen PowerShell, what it can do, and see that it's actually pretty fundamentally different than our traditional languages. Now, the key takeaway is PowerShell is built on objects, not text, right? Which is one of our biggest advantages. And then all the commands and commandlets follow predictable verb-noun structure. We learned about that today, which makes them easy to find. And you can use different commands like get command to find the commandlets, get help to learn about them. Remember, update help is there as well if the help page isn't available. And then, then we learned how to filter and use the commands. So we did a really good job at most of that. Now in the next section, we'll put it all into practice. Make sure you go through your labs for this course. Because after this chapter, we're now going to stop learning new things and start utilizing different projects as we go through the rest of the book. Okay, I hope this was a little bit helpful. Sorry for a little stumble around slide 14. Caught me a little bit off guard. But if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, keep on studying.